When it comes to inventory systems, you usually see one of two options in a lot of VR games. The first option is having some sort of inventory slot system. Say, for example, you have a backpack with lots of different slots all aligned with them, and sometimes you can even scroll through multiple different pages. So that way you can carry tons of different items, but still have them organized and easy to find when you go back to look for something later on. The second option that you commonly see is more like a holster system, where everything has a designated spot. Say, for example, you have a sidearm on your side, a main weapon on your front or back, and then ammo and any additional gadgets you may need spaced out anywhere along your chest or along your hip. But recently, I've been playing a game called Into the Radius, which has a much different approach. Rather than having a very clean and easy to use inventory system for everyone, what they do is they let you more or less make your own setup for your inventory. What they do is you have a backpack and you're able to place whatever you want anywhere within that backpack. Meaning you can have, for example, very few objects and a backpack that's easy to navigate and easy to get things out of. Or you can collect everything that you want and just stuff it in there, making it a huge hassle to sort through later. It's a really neat little idea. So in this tutorial, we're going to duplicate that exact system so that way we're able to place whatever actors we want in a backpack and be able to move around that backpack with everything in it, all maintaining their exact same position. So players are able to have that same setup where they can have something that looks really messy or really clean depending on you. So with that, let's jump right into the video. All right, so let me go ahead and show you exactly how all this works. So right here, this is our little backpack actor here. So this will actually allow for us to take any sort of grabbable object and store it in here. So yeah, so let me go and show you. I've also added in an indicator, which you'll see pops up when my hand gets close enough. And that also happens too if I go to grab it with my other hand or something like that as well. And I can place it right in there. You'll see that the mesh turns red to show that it's been found. And then I can grab this and just kind of move it around wherever I want. I can put as many actors in there as I would like. I did kind of rotate that at not quite the right angle I was aiming for. But anyways, you kind of get the idea there, where I can just kind of push everything in here, and I can also rearrange them however I like. If I wanted to, say for example, start lining them up along the top, which I can't really do very well, but it does kind of give you the idea of how it all works. And yeah, so the indicators just kind of move around, show you which one you're going to be grabbing onto, and then I can grab everything, move it around exactly as you would expect to happen. So, and again, I can take things out and start tossing them around as well. Now, I will be showing you in a future tutorial how we can also take this and attach it to our back as well if you want to be able to take it around with you. Leave it out for a period of time, and then when the player starts running away, it'll automatically snap back to their back area, to their backpack spot, I guess. So yeah, I'll be showing that in a future tutorial. So if you want to see that, be sure you're subscribed right now because I will be showing that in a future tutorial. It'll be completely continuing off of where this one left off. So yeah, so with that, let's go ahead and jump right into the video and I can show you exactly how all this is done. Let's get started by creating our component. I'm going to create a new static mesh component in a folder called Blueprints, and I'm going to call this component Inventory Component. This is what's actually going to store any actors that we want to store within the inventory itself. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and open up this inventory component, and in the class defaults, we want to make sure that the collision preset is set to overlap all dynamic. And we want to do this because if we set it to block all, then no objects are actually going to overlap. They're all just going to kind of pop out. So we need to make sure that all of our actors are able to overlap and be stored within this inventory component. Then next, let's go ahead and start setting up some of our variables and our begin play. We'll start with the begin play since this is going to help us set up our first variable. I'm going to go ahead and get the material of our current static mesh component. I'm going to store this as a variable, and I'm going to call this variable original material. Then let's go and create the rest of the variables we're going to need. We're going to need another material interface. I'm going to be calling this one overlapped material. And then we're going to need two arrays of actors. One is going to be called target actors, and the second one is going to be called contained actors. Now I should note that the contained actors isn't really necessary. I just find it a really nice little feature to be able to figure out what's actually being stored in the backpack. This can be a great option if we wanted to, for example, hide all of those actors when they're on our back, or if we just want to be able to access all of them and see what all the player has in that backpack itself. Then just for a little bit of organization, I'm also going to go ahead and make sure that overlapped material is set to public. I'm going to set the rest of our variables all to private. Next, let's go ahead and jump into the event tick, which is going to handle a lot of what we're doing here. In here, I'm going to start by creating a sequence. I'm going to bring over our target actors and contained actors arrays. We'll go and clear both of these arrays, and then we want to make sure that this runs on sequence then 1. The order of events is very important here, and we're starting with then 1 just because to me that makes a little bit more sense. So we'll be doing sequence then 1 first. Next, let's get all of our overlapping actors, and for each, we're going to check to see if any of them have the grab component. And we'll do this by simply getting the component, grab component, and just checking to see if it is valid. If it is, this is going to tell us that this object is something that can be stored within the inventory. Then following this is valid, we're also going to run a branch checking to see if this current component is held. This is also going to help us to determine if it's currently held or not, which is going to help us determine if this is something the player is intending to drop or not. Now, if this is not held, we're going to assume that this is a contained actor, and that means that this is just something that our inventory component is holding onto for our player. So I'm going to go ahead and add that into the contained actors array. However, on true, we're going to assume that this is an actor that the player is holding and possibly intending to drop into the inventory, so we're going to add this to the target actors array. Next, after adding to our target actors array, we're going to check to see if the overlap material is valid. And if it is, we're going to set the material of our static mesh component to this overlapped material. Then finally, on the completed of our for each loop, we're going to check to see if our target actor's length is equal to 0. And if it is, we're going to set the material of our inventory component to the original material. With that, we're all done with the sequence then 1. So let's go ahead and work on our sequence then 0. This is going to be very simple. All we're going to do is we're going to go through a for each loop on our target actors. Then for each target actor that we have, we're going to get the grab component and check to see if it is held. If it is no longer held, then what we're going to do is we're going to take this target actor and we're going to attach this actor to our inventory component, which is the self in this case. I'm also going to make sure that the location, rotation, and scale rules are all set to keep world, so that way they all stay exactly where they are within this current component. With that, we're all done with the inventory component, so let's go ahead and move on to working on our actual backpack itself. But before we jump to that, I want to create a couple materials that we're going to use in this backpack. To do this, I'm going to create a new folder called materials, and in here I'm obviously going to create a material. Once we have this material created and open, I'm going to first set this material's blend mode to translucent. Then I'll set this base color to just a more like a lightish gray color. And then the opacity I'm going to set to a constant of 0.25. This should allow for us to see everything that's within that inventory component, but still allow for us to see where the inventory component is itself. Then for the overlap material, since we've already set up that original material, I'm just going to create a material instance. And in this material instance, I'm just simply going to change the color of our material. In this case, I'm just going to set it to a nice solid red. Should be more than obvious to see when we actually have something within that inventory component. Once you have both of these materials created, let's go and jump back into the blueprints folder, and in here I'm going to create a blueprint class of type actor. I'll call this new blueprint class backpack. Once we have this backpack blueprint open, we're going to do a couple things. First things first, we're going to add in the inventory component. Now this inventory component is first off going to need a static mesh, so I'm just going to use a simple 1M cube. Then I'm also going to go ahead and set the material to that original material we had created. And you should also see over here off to the right hand side, if you set up your variables correctly, you should see that overlapped material variable. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the overlapped material into that overlapped material variable. The next, I'm also going to add in a grab component, and you don't have to do this, but I'm going to set the grab type to snap. Free will work just fine as well, but personally, I think that snap is a little bit more fitting for this backpack, so I'm just setting it to snap for myself. I'm also going to move that up so that way it's not in the center of our inventory component and we can easily grab it. I'm also going to rotate it a little bit in order to try and make it a little bit easier to hold when we're actually using it. Then finally, I'm going to attach a static mesh to this grab component. In this case, I'm just going to use a 1M cube, and I'm going to scale this down to 0.1 on all axes. Now this is not actually necessary. I'm adding in this static mesh just so I can visibly see where the grab component is, so I know where to reach for if I want to grab and move around this backpack. With that, our backpack is all set up because we handled everything within that inventory component. So back in the level, I'm going to go ahead and drop in our backpack. I'm also going to go and scale it down just a little bit so that way it's a little bit more manageable. And then I'm going to go ahead and drop in the grabbable small cube, so that way we have something we can place within the backpack itself. Now, I should note you can really use just about anything so long as it has a grab component. We'll be setting that up in the player here in just 1 second, but so long as it has a grab component, it should be possible to store it within the backpack itself, and it should be able to be grabbed by our player. And I'll show you how to do that in just 1 second. Now, before we jump into the player itself, I'm going to create one final material. And again, this material is optional, but the reason I'm creating this specific material is because we're going to need some way to tell the player what exactly they're reaching for. And in this material, I'm again going to set that blend mode to translucent. Then after we set this to translucent, we should be able to disable depth testing as well. So I'm going to go ahead and disable that. Then once we've disabled that depth testing, all we really need to do is add in some kind of color for the base color. Now, if you want, you can certainly just leave it as the default color. For my case, I'm going to send it more to like a bluish purple, so that way it's something that I can very clearly see no matter what it is I'm grabbing. Once this is all done, let's go ahead and jump into our VR pawn to finish off all the setup. In the VR pawn, I'm going to start out by giving our motion controller left and our motion controller right both static mesh components. Now for these static mesh components, I'm going to go ahead and set the static mesh to a simple material sphere, and then I want to set the material for our spheres to that same material that we just created. While I'm in the viewport, I can also very clearly see if I need to scale down or up our material sphere as well. In this case, I'm going to be scaling it down to 0.2, so that way it's not too big that we can't see what it is that we're grabbing, but small enough that we should still be able to see the object that we're grabbing. And finally, I'm also going to go ahead and set the collision preset to no collision. This is just to make sure that we shouldn't run into any collision issues when we go to try and grab something. Once we have both of these stack meshes in place, we can go ahead and start working on our blueprints. I'm going to start by creating a new function first. I'm going to call this nearest grab component, and in case the name isn't obvious, it's simply going to tell us what the nearest grab component is, so we know what the player is going to try and grab. For this nearest grab component, we're first going to need an input. This input is going to be a motion controller. This is just going to be the motion controller that's trying to grab, so we know what our origin point is going to be. Then using the world location of the motion controller input, we're going to do a sphere overlap actors. The sphere radius can be whatever you want. I'm going to set it to 30 since I think that this is a pretty good size. Then for the object types, I'm going to make an array. This array is going to contain world dynamic and physics body. Now the reason for this is our backpack itself actually has a world dynamic object type, but those little grabbable small cubes that we set up actually have physics body object types. So we need to be sure that both of these are implemented, so that way we're able to grab both of them. Once we have all of this done, I'm going to go ahead and take our sphere overlap actors and I'm going to pass that into a for each loop. Then in this for each loop, we're going to get the grab component and I'm going to check to see if it is valid. Then, after we check to see if it's valid, I'm going to create a new variable called nearest grab component, and this is going to be a local variable since we don't need to access this outside the function itself. Then with this variable, we're going to get it and we're going to check to see if it is valid or if it's not valid. If it's not valid, we're going to set this variable to the very first grab component that we come across. However, if this nearest grab component is valid, what we're going to do is we're going to get the world location of this nearest grab component. Then we'll also get the world location of the grab component that we're getting from our for each loop and the world location from our motion controller. And using all this, I'm going to get the distance from our motion controller to the nearest grab component as well as the grab component we're currently working with. Then we're going to check to see if the distance between our motion controller and the nearest grab component is greater than the distance between our motion controller and the grab component that we're currently working with. Now, assuming that this is true, then we're going to set the nearest grab component to the current grab component that we are working with. Then finally, after all this is done, we can go ahead and return back to our for each loop, and on completed, we're going to return the nearest grab component variable. Once our function is all done, now we can go and jump into the event graph to actually put everything to work. In the event graph, we're going to start out by grabbing the grab left and grab right input actions. These may already be in use. However, we're not going to be using the original configuration for grab left and grab right. So I'm going to go ahead and just steal these, move these down. And then I'm also going to grab the event tick since we're going to need that as well. Now we'll be starting out with the event tick, but before we jump into that, I'm first going to create two variables. These are both going to be booleans, and these are going to be called left hand grabbing and right hand grabbing. These are simply going to tell us if our hands are currently grabbing or if they are not. We're going to use this in order to determine right off the bat if we should be hiding or showing both of our static mesh indicators. Then in the event tick, we're going to run a sequence. This is going to be for each of our left and right hands. And we'll start out with the left hand. For our left hand, we're going to start by getting our left hand grabbing Boolean variable. I'm going to feed this into a branch. If this branch returns true, we're going to get our left grab indicator mesh, and we're just going to set the visibility to false. However, if that left hand grabbing Boolean returns false, we're going to instead get the nearest grab actor. We're obviously going to feed in the motion control left. Then we'll get the output grab component and we're going to check to see if it is valid. If it is valid, we're going to set this grab component output as a new variable. And then we're going to get that left grab indicator and we're going to set its visibility to true. And we're going to set the world location to the world location of our grab component. However, if that grab component returns is not valid, then we're going to do two things. First, we're going to set that left grab indicator to not visible, and we're going to set that grab component variable to null. I should also note real quick that I did forget to change the name of this variable right off the bat, so I'm just renaming that to left grab component, since we'll also be having a second grab component for our right hand. Once this is done, I'm going to copy everything back to the branch and I'm going to bring that down for our sequence then 1. And this is going to be for our right hand, so I'm going to go through, I'm going to change everything from using the left hand variables as well as the left motion controller and the left grab component. I'm going to swap this out for a right hand grabbing Boolean, as well as our right motion controller, our right grab indicator, and I'm going to create a new variable for our right grab component. Now we'll do the grab left first. On grab left, we want to make sure that that left hand grabbing is set to true on pressed and false on released. Then for each of these, we're going to get the left grab component. I'm going to try to grab on pressed and I'm going to try to release on released. We also want to check to make sure that these are valid. This shouldn't cause any issue if they are not valid, but it might generate an error if it's not. We'll be doing the same exact thing for a right hand, except of course for a right hand, we're going to be swapping in our left hand grabbing Boolean to our right hand grabbing Boolean, and we're going to be using the right grab component instead of the left grab component. And with that, you're all done. You should now be able to not only determine what it is that the player is attempting to grab, but you should also be able to take whatever you grab and store it within the backpack, or be able to grab the backpack itself and be able to move it around freely if you want to grab everything all at once and move it around with you. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe button down below. And I also want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters. And with that, I'll see you in the next reality.